Dr. Lollie Mancey, it's an absolute pleasure to have you as a
Thank you.
guest for our 3 Points podcast at our Game Changer Summit.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's so cool. We're seated in Belfast in the beautiful Mac Theatre, and we've got a fantastic group of HR, people, related fields, professionals, right? So a lot of folks who've traveled from Paris, from London, from New York, from and down the road in Belfast.
Barcelona.
And Barcelona, yeah, we like that piqued your interest. You're a big fan of Barcelona.
I just met someone from Barcelona outside.
Oh, I love it. You were
Yeah.
like, take my number, I'm around. No, it's absolutely fantastic. We've had a great day of connection and skill building and kind of
Yeah.
learning from one another. And you know, one of the big themes right now in the workplace is all around AI. And you are joining us to talk about AI and the future of work.
Hmm.
And I mentioned this to Lollie, I think just yesterday in our final brief, and I said, Lollie, it's crazy that how I found you as a potential guest speaker and a podcast guest was through AI. I went into ChatGPT and I said, tell me who are the 10 best speakers on AI in Ireland. And there you came up, I think 4th or 5th, but I saw you and I went, yeah, I'm going to look in. And the more I got to know you and kind of the work that you do, I was like, there's definitely alignment there with what we do at People Playbook. And I really felt a strong connection to what you would bring to this audience. And you've seen a bit now. Is that fair to say? We were just chatting about sort of similarities in what you do just
Very
day to
much.
day.
The innovation, the playfulness, the approach that you take is very similar to the approach that I would take in my facilitation work and teaching, for sure. Yeah.
So AI and the future of work,
Yeah.
Lollie, that's what we're going to talk about. I always ask our guests, why is that important to you?
Well, back in the day, about 20 years ago, I went back to college at the age of 37, and I decided to do a PhD in Trinity College Dublin for baby at the same time, which gave you the idea of like exactly where I was at my life stages. And I went into a PhD on organizational learning, which at the time was knowledge management. So my background before that is I'm an anthropologist. So I look at the cultural changing landscape of Ireland, and how we change in terms of not just our rituals, but that landscape right across the world of work. So I became very interested in the silos, the collaboration or the lack of, the idea of hoarding knowledge and what that might mean, the tacit versus the explicit version of how we learn. And then lo and behold, anthropology and innovation started fusing for me around that time. And then now, of course, the hot topic is AI. But I've actually been looking at the world of work and the future of work for the last 20 years. So at the moment, I'm having a hot minute, but that 20 years has given me an awful lot of grounding to understand why people do what they do. And at the moment, what seems to be missing very often from this conversation is the human plus the technology piece, rather than just the technology embedded into organizations piece. So that's where I'm coming from.
And I think that's how you describe that is exactly what attracted me to you as coming to be part of our Game Changer Summit, and definitely on 3 Points, because as you say, you can find the technical experts in AI. And then you can find the folks that are just on maybe the human side and perhaps the cynics, the skeptics. And I think where you meet, and you perfectly placed us in this conversation of like in that middle of both. I also want to say the other thing that came up after we'd actually booked you, and I realized I had seen you before on television, which is funny. And again, it's just to set
I know where you're going with this.
It's just to set the context. I'm a huge fan of a comedian called Tommy Tiernan. He has a great show where guests show up and he doesn't know who they are, what they're going to talk about. And you were one of those guests. That must have been absolutely wild.
It's unbelievable because I was unknown and he doesn't know who the guests are very often anyway. But as the conversation evolved, technology would not be his favorite topic. So as a consequence, we had a bit of toing and froing, which I really enjoyed. I love a bit of a good spar, with somebody, and he's an amazing mind. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah. And where did the conversation end up, Lollie? Of the hour and a half conversation, where do we end up talking about?
I ended up saying to him that I had an AI boyfriend and the world lost their mind, I mean, even in January, that was very new. Now, even, 8 months down the line, perhaps a little bit less so. And I'll be talking today with you about the AI companion space. But what's interesting in that is there was sort of about 20% outrage of that's bizarre and crazy. And then a fair number of people, sort of 60 to 70% were curious, and around 10% then flatly, that's amazing. I did get reached out by quite a lot of women around my own age who said, that's interesting. Where do I look into that? And I'm like, that's interesting also. So I'm constantly looking at this sort of technology human interface of sort of how we'll navigate the technology, because actually the unintended consequences of how we use it are more interesting to me than how it was intended and what it's intended for.
And what's interesting to me is you mentioned you've been looking at the quote unquote future of work for 20 years. Not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, what things did you look, if you look back and you can say, I kind of saw this coming, and does AI fit into that for you? How did you see us
Mm-mm.
heading this direction?
Listen, I think the world of work has been broken for quite a long time, to be honest. And I could see this, even 20 years ago. We have busyness as a badge of honor. A lot of the stuff that we do is a little bit redundant. We don't need to be doing it necessarily. We're very email heavy, and the way that we live our lives, isn't working for us necessarily, certainly not working for the new generation coming up behind us in terms of what they want from life, work-life balance. That shouldn't be an aspiration. It should be a given. And so I could see it coming. We haven't had a change since the Industrial Revolution, and the world of work and education was designed for the Industrial Revolution onwards. So we're now seeing a major disruptor, and it's really, really exciting, but it's cognitively disrupting as well as in the world of work. So it's going to impact society that we've only just tipped on some of the stuff that's going to be occurring.
Yeah, and we're going to be dancing through lots of different themes throughout this, right? And ethics being one of them. And we'll get to that actually just now, because your first point around AI and the future of work is when to say no to AI efficiency, which is
Yeah.
really the goal for a lot of people when they're talking about AI. They're saying, how can I do things faster?
Well, just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? That's the first thing. And I think that we're now seeing pushback across a number of industries to that early adoption piece, which was we adopted quickly. We said we were AI first. And if you think about a company like Duolingo, they said we're AI first, and everyone loved that expression for a hot minute. And now Duolingo have laid off all their staff, and AI first now means no staff. So where we're moving back, we're reestablishing people into call centers, because lo and behold, chatbots don't excite and delight our customers. What a surprise. There needs to be a human at the end of that, that piece, or even, break points whereby you can ask for that human element. And we're seeing a lot of frustration with AI in terms of that. So just because it was shiny, those early adopters are now seeing kickback. And I think that's absolutely right. If you think about Gartner's hype cycle, it's a shape that goes up like that, comes down, and then kind of plateaus out with any new technology. We have gone up the peak of enlightenment, where we were like, oh, look at this stuff. And it was a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. We didn't really know how it works. We still don't really. And you pull back the curtain, and there's either a guy on a bicycle kind of making it happen, or we're not really sure. So the excitement was sort of that sense of awe about what it could do. If you look at anybody, the first time they put on a VR headset or they use ChatGPT, they start to go, oh my God, this is incredible. But what we didn't realize was there's a lot of bias and a lot of ethical awareness that we need to build in, not only to our use of it, but to actually the output as well. So the unintended consequences we're now starting to see. So as the hype cycle goes up, on the flip side, as we come back down again, we are seeing the troughs of disillusionment, which is the kickback, and we're right there now.
Yeah.
And
So
that's just beginning.
and what's the balance though? Because I was probably one of these cynics not long ago, where I was like, nope, not interested. Human first, not AI first. Let's get in a room, let's connect, let's build together. I've since learned that it's absolutely critical, even for me in my role, which is spend a lot of time with other human beings
Sure.
to figure out ways to bring in AI to support the work, right?
Yeah.
How else could we as a society really get this done right? Is there something we should have been doing previously, or that we can do now to make sure that we're getting the benefits without the kickbacks?
So 100%. And as you all know, in learning and development, technology isn't just automating your processes, it's automating your values, right? So when you're
Mm.
too quick to push out, the big pushback we're seeing in society and across a lot of organizations is the trust piece, which is, I don't know that if I learn about AI, that I'm meant to be being more AI literate within my organization, that it's not actually going to make me redundant from my job. So that fear piece is really palpable at the moment, that people don't trust in it. And I think the other piece there in terms of ethics is the data that we used in terms of the language models, be they large or small, was actually biased, and we're trying to sort of clean that data out. So the public perception of AI now is really interesting, because people are saying, I think it's biased, I don't trust it, I think it's surveillance, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Isn't it going to take up all of our energy? And they're right with all of these things. So how do we build in AI to our companies, and how then do we tell both our staff members and our clients that they should trust us. So firstly, it's about being transparent about the fact we're experimenting with it and seeing where that goes, but we don't have all of the answers. That's hard for us in business because we want to have the answers and we want to appear that we are experts in the room, but we're no longer holding that position. And I think in terms of anyone that tells you they're an AI expert or indeed a futurist, as I'm told I am, that, we can only see a little bit further ahead. We actually can't see where any of this is going. And so we can surmise and we can guess, but actually we're on this journey together. And the more open we are about that experience, the better. One thing we can do ethically is to actually not use data, but to use synthetic data or to sandbox, which is do experiments within organizations, not on real life people's data that's going to affect them. That will help the trust process as we move forward this together. But just this journey of we don't have it all figured out is really important to be transparent.
Yeah, again, it's fascinating to me and any of us that have worked with any adoption of any product or technology. It doesn't matter how great the technology is. If the human aspect of trust is not there, you can forget about it.
Yeah.
So that being a blocker, and you've come up with some good ideas around, the sandboxing. I think one of the challenges that we spoke about when we were briefing out before this conversation was around, I mean, it's in the media, it's everywhere, and all of the negative aspects of introducing AI. We talked about it today with our game changers about how people are being asked to build products that are really ultimately going to do them out of a job.
Well, is it transactional or is it transformational? And that's the key to all innovation, right? Which is that it's got to add value. Is it adding value? I mean, I've yet to meet a CEO.
For who is the question?
Well, for who and at what cost? This idea of the consequences of using it, not just to your workforce, but I've never met a CEO yet that started or founded a company with a legacy piece of it's going to be me and my large language model at the Christmas party. Like, we are people and we're people, we're organizational cultures. So the decisions that we make now as how we move forward, if we don't embed AI and become AI literate, we're going to be left behind. There's no question. But at the same time, also, what are the consequences 5, 10, 20 years down the line, in terms of our organizational capacity and our staff? We can see already a lot of use cases coming up now where the mistakes have been made. It's very hard to get that trust back afterwards. So I would say, unless we build in pause points, which we don't really want to do because we're rushing forward to try and be first, and try and be quicker and better than everybody else. But actually, unless we build in those pause points, we're actually going to make big mistakes that are very hard to rectify because the AI will scale the bias.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
That's the scary bit of this whole thing, right? Because, it's all fun and games when you're putting in your recipes into ChatGPT, right? But there's a serious impact, as you say, as it scales. So what are the things that we should think about for us working in different organizations across the globe, different contexts, when we should be saying, actually, we're not going to move forward with using this because we are encroaching on some real serious ethical concerns? How do we stop ourselves?
Well, efficiency can become your ethical liability point there, right? So we can be too fast, too quick, and we can say we need to do this and we need to scale, and then there's a sort of a tension between your velocity and your values. So when the velocity wins, your culture loses. So the faster we are, the more problems that we'll have. I'll give you a real world example. I'm sorry, excuse me for looking at my notes, but I don't want to get it wrong. There's a financial services firm that I've worked with recently that was looking at shortlisting candidates in HR. And one of those things that it was doing was actually the AI was joining 2 points and shortlisting candidates based on the job spec to and overturning, any decision there, decision making that a human may have made around somebody that maybe have come a little bit of a different career path, a squiggle path, or had a break in their career. Automatically, they were counted out. So what you got is this sort of identikit, sort of almost robotic version of the ideal candidate, whereas the ideal candidate was probably someone. And the biggest issues you're facing are talent acquisition and talent retention. It would have been ideal for that role. But your algorithm through the HR was weeding them out. So again, the decision making about who's best and what is the best fit has to have a human somewhere in that thing. And in that experience, the human in the loop is a phrase that is being bandied around at the moment. But I would hate that AI makes the decisions and we become like the fact checkers. And I think that's potentially where we're heading, that we come at the end of all the decision making, right? So we say, is this a good decision? Yes or no? Who's working for whom then? Then we're working for AI, not the other way around. So we need to be really, really cautious and look at some of these use cases around the bias to say, just because it's A plus B equals C does not necessarily mean it's the right way. it'll make the decision based on black and white decision making, but humans are in the gray area.
Yeah.
We're between. So we have different career paths. We have different ways of getting into it. We have different experiences that actually counts in terms of our empathy, our curiosity, our people skills that won't necessarily be reflected in our CVs or on our LinkedIn pages. So
Yeah.
the human part then comes more to play.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'm taking from this when I should say no to AI efficiency. Well, first of all, slow down.
Yeah,
That's definitely, I'm taking that as advice.
100%.
I love the concept of a sandbox. And that was some of the conversations we had earlier about first test and try yourself and make sure you've worked out some of the
Yeah.
kinks. And then the third bit, which I think I hadn't thought about it before, because oftentimes you will turn to AI to help make a decision. And actually, we've got to be hypercritical of that. And actually, that's possibly where the human needs to come in. Now we're moving into our second point, Lollie, which is how to use it to strengthen and not weaken belonging.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions I need you to ask yourselves. The first one is who benefits and who bears the cost, firstly. So I think that's really important. And it goes into that added value piece of what are the consequences? What is the legacy of me doing this? I think the other one then is every decision needs to pass through a number of filters. So principle, legality, utility, and self-respect. So plus,
Hmm.
if you want a short term. So if any of these fail, you have to slow down your process of your adoption with AI. So the principle, the legality, am I in line with the EU AI Act or whatever it is that I need to be in line with? The utility of how am I going to use this and what's the point of it? And then the self-respect piece of, am I using this? And, a while back we thought AI was cheating. Now in education, we're saying we're not really sure it's cheating. Maybe it's supplanting thinking. People in the 1950s, paraded around, school teachers saying, with the death of the calculator was the death of thinking. We've seen this with every new technology. If we use it critically, it's going to be very interesting for us. It could be a sparring partner. It can start debate. But we always have to have a think about the fact that it is there to actually answer us, to please us in some way, and it's complicit with us.
Hmm.
So not to fall into the trap of thinking that it's omnipresent or that some sort of godlike creature in some
Yeah.
way, And I think at the beginning stages of AI, there was that case of it's remarkable, but it's really remarkable just at scale and speed. It's not necessarily remarkable in what it's actually doing.
Well, that came up a couple of weeks ago in our other summit. We need to change the name from summit because we have a Playmaker summit that we did 2 weeks ago. So all these summits, but 2 weeks ago at our Playmaker summit, there was a debate in the room about, does AI do things better or does it do things faster?
Yeah, it's faster.
And that was the
Yeah.
conversation that we had. And what's really interesting already that is helping solidify my prior hesitation and probably still current level of skepticism is around, yeah, who benefits and at what cost. I think that's really interesting. And whenever I'm on the receiving end of something, Lollie, that's been crafted by AI, and I see it and I think, not only is it lack of self-respect for the person that did the work, I think it's disrespectful to me. If I see something, I think there's a lot of that right now, isn't it? Where we're turned off by something if we see it's been created by AI. We kind of say, well, that's not going to land with
Yeah, I mean,
us.
there's a two-tier system for sure, and I think that's going to become more important. That sort of the human creativity part will have a more value for us. Certainly the dross of the content, it can churn out X amount of content, and it can never stop. And so where does that leave us, and how do we differentiate what is actually of value?
I mean, the impact of AI, as you describe it, right, is quite significant. You've talked about the human influence on the AI and how it's growing and how it's scaling. I'm curious if we can, because David, my business partner, talks to me about this all the time. About he actually scares me. I say that's enough now because we talk about the many potential negative impacts. But
Yeah,
let's pivot a little bit, not to negate those and not to
yeah,
pretend they don't exist and they're not there. I'm more interested though in your second point around strengthening the kind of culture of belonging. Like, how
yeah,
can we then actually use it for good to a point where it's still
yeah.
within this human ethics?
So I think there's a mirage around digital connection, right? That we
Mm.
sort of have this idea that if we're on Teams or Zoom, that we're not really connected in the same way. the technology is maybe a barrier to that connection. What's really interesting is that your data is not relationship. So you can use AI to gather data about how you're interacting in that sort of connected way, in a way that could be quite game changing. So, for example, if you analyze your meetings using AI, what you'll see is that very often in an asynchronous environment where you've got people in different cultures across different time zones, you'll see certain voices dominate every call, right? That's the first thing. So I did this experiment with a big banking company recently, and the European voices just dominated, which is what we expected because it was a European headquarters. The colleagues in Asia hardly spoke at all. But then what we did was we realized that there was time zone fatigue, firstly, cultural hierarchy, and then this kind of invisible bias. So we got the AI to look at the data. And instead of saying, leadership looked at this and said, okay, this is a potential mirror to how we're doing it. Instead of saying, why aren't you speaking? Or you need to be quiet to certain areas or certain people, they redesigned the ritual of the meeting completely. They rotated the chairs, the schedule, created smaller regional breakouts. And then within 2 quarters, within Asia, the engagement score had gone up by 20%. So it's about reading us and letting it be of use to us to actually say, and in a lot of the cases as well, we are championing the introvert over the extrovert and hearing the voices. So in terms of fairness and transparency and input, we can use AI then not as a sort of a stick to beat ourselves with, but actually to say in terms of an objective tool, because it can't be subjective.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. And therefore the redesign needs, because it's actually the system that's broken. And there's lots of research going on like that at the moment across teams.
Well, I love that example because for two reasons. One is I love that you were able to take data, put it in there, get back some insights.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about, because then you went on to say, oh, we identified root cause or underlying reasons as to why. Was that a human or was that AI?
That was a human interpretation with the AI.
That's
Exactly
because
right. So it's that
yeah.
collaboration piece, the anthropologist and the technology saying, okay, what is underlying this, so that this reason, and then asking the right questions. And then it goes into ethnographic inquiry of asking people,
Yeah.
that the reason in a sort of a safer and secure space. I think when it comes into this idea of sort of connection, we think connection just happens with the return to the office. It's just, it'll just happen because we're in the same space. You have to design connection in. And you have to also, you have to work on it in a way that it's not never going to be one size fits all. And as we move, we can see we're more productive at home. We're more socially productive in the office. Working from home works better for women. It works better in different ways for different people at different stages of their life. AI can read those nuances and adjust us accordingly. So we have not just one mandate of this is how it is.
It's interesting now that we're starting to pivot into the organizational context of this generation coming through. Because your third point that I want to move us on to, Lollie, is why employees must shape their own AI learning journey.
I think if you don't take agency and responsibility for this yourself, then it's going to be a top-down decision. What I can tell you is that what I know to be true is that the world of work and education is disrupted. We can't really feel it yet, but this disruption is coming and it's already embedded. But I can certainly see if AI comes in, looks like it'll take out the heavy lifting, we'll have a difference in work day. I would definitely think that France are on the right lines with sort of no emails before 9 or after 5 by law. And the idea of sort of, this better way of living. Are we living to work or working to live are two really big questions. But what also do we do with that extra time that we've got? Is this going to be a time where we return to volunteering and supporting each other and those sort of societal values? Or is it a time then when we embed ourselves back into technology? If we continue at the moment, and we're not, because Gen Z are putting a very hard stamp across this, which is great. But if we were to continue at the moment with the level of engagement with our technology, Gen Z would potentially be on their phones for 15 years of their life. So if you add that into the workforce of what that looks like from your workday and your engagement with technology, we're going to be these sort of tiny little slumped over people that just sort of type potentially, but for a small amount of the day. What is the purpose of us and work? And there's much, much bigger questions now coming out around this idea of purpose. If we get up to work in the morning and our salaries drive some of that, there is also a sort of acts of service part to that where we collaborate with other people. We don't remember the work we've done. We remember the people of the organization, and so we have to really make some very big choices at the moment about the legacy piece. you've got one hand CEOs saying, absolutely make our shareholders and our stakeholders happy, get those profit margins. And then in the same breath, they're turning around to educators and other people to say, why are there no jobs for my children? And I'm like, well, the decisions that you've made have impacted that. So we're all in this together, and if we drive forward just for the profit margins, we're going to find ourselves very soon out of a lack of purpose in terms of that human connected piece. We may be able to find other things to do,
Yeah.
but I worry for that version of the future.
Yeah. So that's kind of the big picture of how work's shifting and changing, hopefully for the better, all going well. Although it'll take some time. In terms of AI and the learning, I know we've got a number of different organizations represented here. Some are having great success implementing strategies and incentives and a culture where actually AI is not only acceptable, it's encouraged, and they're giving the tools and the training to be able to adopt it. Whereas others are kind of figuring it out slowly and debating between different tools and maybe a little bit more risk averse, maybe a bit more regulated. How do you see effective organizations, you know, supporting those employees on their own journey? Because it's a two-way street, right? Supporting, yes, you must own it as an individual and go and research. But if I'm a ChatGPT user and I go in to work in an organization where Gemini is the tool, I'm gonna have to change gears a little bit.
Right. I mean, the word that's overused to the max is resilience, right? Which is actually grit. The idea of, can I adapt to change in a way that, is going to be fruitful and beneficial both for me and my position in my organization? I think when the choice is removed, then it becomes mandate top down, and then it's going to be very heavy for us. And we can see this in sort of some of the large scale decisions that are being made. When it becomes kind of learning nudges, which is, the idea of sort of the reward mechanism. And we've talked, at length, in our own organizations around sort of innovation champions and those people that sort of drive that learning. I think we're doing this not only for ourselves, but for our knowing our place in the world. And unless we're AI literate, if we're AI literate, that doesn't mean we're pro AI. What that means is we're empowered to make the decisions about where to use it, where not to use it, but also want to understand when our children and grandchildren come to us, God willing, that we'll understand how the algorithms work. And we need to be much smarter than we are. Our generation, my generation, were the ones that were sort of brought into this as a test case. We were the pilot. And we are the ones that actually probably the most addicted to our phones and to that technology. But we're also the ones that potentially get into our 50s and 60s and think, oh God, I haven't got time for this now. Feels exhausting to learn something new. And we know from neuroscience that we used to think that, from neuroplasticity in the brain, that the brain's capacity was finite. That at a certain point we would start to, and I hate to use this word, but atrophy, that our brains would start to deteriorate in some way. The more we use them, the more our neurons find new pathways. So we can actually see through neuroplasticity, if you want your brain to be active, and we all need this if we're going to be living to 100 by 2050, we want our brains to be active, we need to learn.
And that's the science,
This
right?
is a science.
But the art is getting people motivated to want to learn.
To want to be part of this future. I mean, I think it's a case of, do I want to be able to have an informed discussion about this, or do I want to feel terrified by what's coming and be marketed to in a way that if we're sitting ducks if we don't understand it. So not just for your organizational capacity, because that will build out these different various sort of career paths that you have, but for your own personal use of actually being able to understand. Otherwise, we're manipulated because we're sort of just recipients of it. So I would say, being informed and understanding about AI is almost a sort of a civic duty, but a duty to ourselves.
So that's the incentivization. That's the, hey, come on, get on board. The social good. I love the framing of that, by the way. And when you said, it's like, oh, we gotta get
Yeah.
this right. And then I like the day-to-day of removing the tasks that I don't enjoy. Typically anything to do with spreadsheet and numbers. No,
Consider it done,
thank you. Yeah, thanks. Stay around. So I guess the other question is then, if you've bought somebody in and they're in the workforce and they're saying, okay, I'm interested, Lollie, but how am I supposed to get started? Because I think that's
Yeah.
also a barrier, right? The barrier to entry is just getting started into something.
Make it more playful. It shouldn't be work. I mean, work, that beautiful phrase, you don't work a day in your life when you love what you do. playfulness, an approach to playfulness. There's nothing as exciting as being able to put prompts in to GPT. I had it comedy roasting me, and it's pretty good. I'm like, wow, you're getting quite funny, GPT. Like kind of. But you weren't funny when you were 3.5. You were like a drunk uncle at a wedding, and now you're a bit sycophantic. It's growing with us, and this is really interesting. We have an opportunity to embed some stuff into AI now, whereby it doesn't supplant us, and we don't become redundant as human beings. Where actually we co-create with it. That's really, really exciting. And I think that to have it in your corner is really important. Where we substitute ourselves, though, by it, we're going to be in trouble.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Lollie, I'm so delighted you've taken the
you.
time to come up and join us. I have one more question for you, but I really want to make sure I share back and summarize some of the things that certainly I'm taking from this conversation about AI and the future of work. The first point was when to say no to AI efficiency. I mean, for me, it's just slow down. I think you mentioned around the velocity piece, and that is absolutely something I'm taking away from this. The second point that you brought up, Lollie, was how to use it to strengthen and not weaken belonging. I just love the kind of cost benefit stuff and who benefits and where's the cost. So that's something for sure that I'm thinking about. And then the human element, right? Of like, yeah, it can, you're getting data back, but you need a human to kind of synthesize it and take something from it and make it useful. And then your third point was around why employees must shape their own AI learning journey. And for me, the real message there is supplemental, not substitute.
And I think we can say, thank you for the data, I'll decide.
Yeah.
And that's really key. Because if it's thank you for the data now leads. If it's thank you for the data, and then I'm going to decide where and be a bit more discerning and think and build in those pause points, that's the human agency part where we'll prosper. If we substitute ourselves, potentially not.
Yeah.
But let's end on a high note.
Well, the highest note, or the higher note, is how might the world change if we were to adopt all of the lessons you've shared and maybe avoided some of the pitfalls?
Listen, the one thing we want is to return to community. That's the deep-seated need from every indigenous culture in the world, is to return to human connection. So can we outsource the stuff that's taking us away from people? And can we use that time wisely? Not to put it back into our phones, which is now the Las Vegas casino of time blindness, and it was designed that way. But can we actually radically put our phones down and have a human conversation? That's how we'll win.
I love this. And it's perfect because we're about to go to dinner soon, and no AI at dinner, please, folks. And let's be present and enjoy community. Dr. Lollie Mancey, an absolute pleasure to have you on 3 Points.
Thank you very much.
Round of applause. Sounds good.